Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Richard W. Block. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Coffee with Jesus, which actually is a sequel to his first book, which many of you may have actually remembered. Richard was on our network not too long ago, and we discussed his first book, Life as I Lived It, Small Town Country Living. Now, again, the interview went so well, we had to invite Richard back on for another one, all right? So now today we're discussing the sequel to that first book, as I stated, Coffee with Jesus, available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com, but also through Google Books. Richard was brought to our network by some of the best movers in the business, Author Reputation Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, do yourself a favor and contact ARP. And you can find out more information on them at authorreputationpress.com. So, Richard, first and foremost, welcome back to People of Distinction, and thank you so much again for being a guest. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good, and thank you, Benji. It's very entertaining talking with you all the time. Actually, that first interview I thought was a blast, you know?
Absolutely. Likewise, Richard. And listen, you come back for a third time, man, we're just going to sign you on. You're going to be a co-host here on People of Distinction, okay? I think we're just going to cross that bridge and just make it happen.
Yeah.
Richard, for our guests that didn't hear the first go-round, this first question may start to spill over into the book since it is a memoir, and if it does, not a problem whatsoever. But let's start off by telling our listening audience a little bit more about yourself and your background, please.
Well, I started out very young as a child. At any rate, I've accomplished a lot of things in my life. I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm an instructor for the NRA. I do teaching for the Department of Wildlife here in Ohio. I teach hunter safety courses. I'm a Kentucky colonel. I'm also a Lord. English Lord, also knighted. I'm a sir, different titles and things that I've accomplished throughout my life. And my wonderful book, I would say wonderful, my very entertaining book, and I design my books for people who don't have time to read, and they're very easy reading. A child can read these books. There's nothing bad in them at all. Mm-hmm. And they contain so many things that are designed to bring back memories of any reader, no matter where they're from, of their life as they grew up. Because people's lives run so many parallels. You do so many of the same things, no matter where you're from, as you grow up. And so it brings back memories, and that's what it's supposed to do.
Fantastic. Now, today's interview is all about Coffee with Jesus. Tell us a little more detail about your book, Richard.
Well, it's a book that contains 106 short stories that are all true. And they're about life's experiences, about growing up, even about adulthood, everyday happenings, everyday experiences, things you really don't think about. Things you take for granted, you know, like, I'll tell you something simple. People take for granted. They go out, they jump in the car, they turn the key, and they take for granted that car is going to start. And it usually does. Those are just some of the things you take for granted, and you don't even think about them. And you do that all the time, all day long, every day. And you just have to think about it.
Richard, I'm curious because, of course, you know, as we've already discussed and as we've experienced, the culmination of stories within your books are all taken from your experience on your journey. And as you stated, things we take for granted, things that we all experience, right? Which is why the relatable content is so important and really heightens the stakes because we can all, we've all been there. I'm curious, what inspired you to write this narrative and embark upon this journey where there are people that inspired you, artists that inspired you? Why did you decide to develop these memoirs?
Well, during my teaching classes there, when you're teaching students about gun safety and hunting and fishing and all these kind of things, you tell them stories. I would tell stories to help them remember things that I knew would be on the test. And then when it came test time, which you have a question test of 100 answers or 100 questions that you have to answer. If they have trouble with a particular question, they can raise their hand and they'll ask me, they don't understand the question. And then I'll say, well, you remember the story about this or that? And they say, oh, yeah. And I said, well, then just answer the question. And I thought, after so many classes of telling so many stories that, I ought to write some of these down. They'd make a good book. So over a period of about 10 years of traveling, I did a lot of traveling. And one job that I had back and forth to the Florida Keys and back to Cincinnati, but I would write some of these down while I was traveling and then have them rewritten and typed up and stuff when I would get home. And I'd have more or less almost a biography, autobiography, whichever, of my life, which doesn't really intend it to be that, but it's just a lot of really good stories that are entertaining. And I thought, well, should share these stories with a lot of people because there's a lot to learn from these stories. There's a lot of facts in them and there's a lot of history in them as well. And of course, there's a lot of truth in there. They're not bull crap, I guess you could say. I'm not kidding people about a lot of things, but what's true is true in there, and that you can take it for granted that it's right, whatever you're reading, that it's not some farce or fairy tale that I'm embarking on there. And that's good for the people to actually read something and they can believe it, that say, well, this is what he said and this must be right,
Richard, let's talk about your title. Okay, because your first book, Life as I Lived It, small town country living. I mean, it hits it right on the head. It lines up with, of course, the fact that this is a memoir. So we know exactly what we're getting into, and it seems appropriately titled. Now, the sequel,
right,
Coffee with Jesus. I absolutely love the title. It instantly sucks you in. It's so intriguing. But I'm curious, why did you choose that title to be the representation for your book?
Well, I'll tell you. My grandson and I, which I have him come and help me with the computer all the time. He lays out a lot of stuff for me because I'm not that computer literate. We were tossing around names, and I thought, there's billions of books out there. Not millions, but billions of books out there with all kinds of titles. And it's hard to come up with a title anymore that you're not infringing on somebody else's title.
Absolutely.
And so I just off the top of my head came up with this title. And the book is not about Jesus per se, but it is about the world that his Father created for us to explore and learn and live in and enjoy. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. I would take some of my company executives that I work for hunting, and we would be standing there, and this one executive, he was standing there and he says, "Look at that tree. Did you ever see such a beautiful tree?" And I thought, I've walked by that tree many, many times in my life, and I never really stopped and looked at it and thought of it in that light. And it's interesting to get someone else's view of something that you take for granted. Well, that tree's always been there. I never paid much attention to it. But yet here's a fellow that's looking at it for the first time, and he finds beauty in it. And I thought, he's right. That is a beautiful tree, and it's huge, and it's hundreds of years old, this particular tree we were looking at. It's so big around, and it was a big old oak tree, that it would take three people holding hands to reach around the daggone thing. That's how big it is. And it's just amazing how something can live that long. You know, we'll never see that age, but you have a whole world out there that everything is living and breathing and moving along and growing. And if you don't take notice of it, you know, you just take it for granted. An interesting thing is with the Boy Scouts, we take our Boy Scouts up to a function in Cincinnati. Our kids are all from the country. And you take them there to the big city, and you see all these kids from the town, from the inner city. They're at this camping area in the country, and they're running around, and they're playing in the creeks, and they're turning over rocks, and they're catching frogs and tadpoles and looking at the butterflies and everything. And our kids are like looking at them like they're nuts, you know, because that's just something every day that they have at home. And I often thought, well, if you take our kids and turn them loose in downtown Cincinnati with the big buildings and everything to ride the elevators and the escalators and fool with the traffic and everything, you'd have the same experience coming out of them in an unfamiliar area. And I've always laughed at that, thinking how funny that would be to do that.
What would you say was a highlight for you? Or if not a highlight, maybe something that surprised you, or one of the stories that really sticks out in your mind that you've incorporated into the book?
Oh, gee. You know, I've written so many stories that it's sometimes it almost feels like a blur, you know. It was interesting you talking about the sequoia trees and things, and when I think of that one tree that they cut a big section out of that you drive your car through, how huge that is, you know, and you were standing there and saying your experience there, and you were feeling the spirit of what it is, that it's something you can't control. It's like the weather, you know, you just have to go with it no matter what it is and make the best out of it. And those are a lot of the, I guess you would say a lot of the themes of a lot of the stories that I've written, that you just have to make the best of a bad situation. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Guys, again, here on the line with Richard W. Block. We're discussing his fantastic book, Coffee with Jesus, which, remember, is a sequel to his first book, Life as I Lived It, Small Town Country Living, both of which are available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. Also, Google Books is available as well. Richard, I would really be remiss if I didn't ask this next question, and I know my listening audience would really look forward to this as well. Of course, we have to go and pick up the book to learn all of the stories that you've incorporated. But since we have you here on the line, can you either, maybe read one of your stories from the book, or just talk to us a little bit more about one of them to give us a little more of a teaser of what to expect?
Well, I have a story title there about feeding the birds, but it's not the story that I would like to tell. Here a while back, we took a trip down to NASA there in Florida to watch a launch. They were launching a military launch, and I wanted to go down there and view that. And at any rate, I have this thing about seagulls. Seagulls love me. I have a place up on top of Michigan, and every time I'm up there, I go down to the local Walmart, and I go in the Dollar Tree and get bags of popcorn. And I go out on the parking lot there, and I squawk like a seagull. I speak a lot of different languages, believe it or not. And I go out and squawk like a seagull, and the seagulls all come, and then I'll throw popcorn out, and they just gobble it all up. Well, we were down in Florida, and my grandson and I were sitting at a pool there by the ocean, and I said, let's go over to the snack shop and see if they got any popcorn. So we went over there and got some popcorn and went down on the ocean floor there, and so I said, now watch this. So I squawked like a seagull. My God, there must have been 400 seagulls show up. And I started throwing out the popcorn, and they're just gobbling it up everywhere. And it was to the point where I could just stand there and hold my hand up in the air, and the birds, because of the wind there along the ocean, they can virtually stand still in midair by flapping their wings a little bit in the current of the wind. and they would just take the popcorn out from between my fingers and never even touch my fingers. And we're standing there, and the seagulls are just everywhere, and we're feeding the seagulls. And I just happened to notice there out of the corner of my eye that there was an Oriental couple standing there, a man and a woman and a little girl. And they had their cameras, naturally, and they were taking pictures. And I thought, I'll have a little fun. So I took a handful of popcorn and threw it underneath their feet there. And, of course, all the seagulls stormed them. And they thought it was funny, too. But they asked me, said, "Boy, do you come down and feed these birds all the time?" I said, "No, this is just today. Whenever I'm there, I get down and feed them." But it's amazing how even wild animals can be so docile around human beings. They don't realize that a human being is the most dangerous animal in the woods, but they just ignore that. They overcome their fears in lieu of having something to eat. And that's just so stirring to be able to do that. I know up in Michigan in the wintertime, we have a bird feeder up there, and we feed the animals. I like the little chickadees, the little black-capped chickadees. And I'll go out on the porch and get a handful of seed and just stand there motionless. And the birds will come up and they'll sit on my hand, and they'll eat the bird seed out of my palm of my hand. And people stand inside taking pictures through the window of me feeding the birds like that. And it's just amazing that they just have no fear. And it's a great adventure. It's a great feeling that you can do that. I've had the animals light on my shoulders and everything else doing that kind of stuff.
Richard, as we start to tie up this fantastic interview, I'm curious. We've covered so much information so far. Is there anything else that we haven't covered or we haven't discussed that you'd like to make sure our listening audience is aware of?
Well, as I had stated before in that first interview, what does it take to write a book? And it takes a lot to write a book. I mean, you can sit down and write up stories and things, but when it comes to actually publishing the book, you have to decide what kind of paper you want this book printed on, what the pages are going to look like, in other words, what they're going to be made of, what the cover is going to be. Is it going to be soft or hard, glossy, flat? How many words are going to be on each page? What size, type are they going to be? What font are they going to be? And there's just so many things. How many pages are going to be in the book?
Absolutely.
What size is the book going to be? And there's so many things to consider. And one of the things that I had told when I first worked with the Author Reputation Press is that to get a copy of my first book, because they were asking me all these questions, I said, make sure you have a copy of the first book and just look at the paper it's on, look at the kind of cover it's on, look at the font, the type, everything. And all you have to do is use the same. That's all you have to do. Just use the same. It's all laid out for you, but you're just going to put different stories in it and different picture on the cover. And that made it a lot easier for them to actually publish that book. Once you've got one out there, then you actually have an idea of what you're going to want from then on, or what you want to do from then on. I know in my first book there, I had a computer proofread it for me. And, just take the word for. You can spell for F-O-R, F-O-U-R, F-O-R-E, or the digit 4. And the computer just puts down what it thinks it wants to put down there, what goes, And if you don't catch that, then you've got a blooper in there, or a typo, you might say. And my first book was just full of those. And the Author Reputation Press, I had them actually proofread that book and get all of that junk out of there. And then I had to change the cover on it to a more pleasing cover that would be more attractive to readers anywhere. I know the first book, I had a local picture in there, which all the local people liked it, but that really didn't mean anything to anybody else. So I went with the picture of the Delta Queen on the first book going up the river. Now, the Coffee with Jesus book, that's got a picture of Jesus on the front with his fishermen there in the ocean, doing the fishing bit. And it's a beautiful cover. It really is. And where they dug that up at, I have no idea, but they sent me proofs of different pictures, and I picked that one out, and it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. And it's a real eye catcher. That's one thing that that will help sell a book, is that you have an eye-catching picture on the front of the book, something that's going to spark some interest, as well as the title. I know you take a company like McDonald's. Their object is to get people to come to their store, their restaurant, and eat. And on Saturdays, you see on the cartoons, why there's Ronald McDonald there all the time. And Ronald McDonald is a big pull. In other words, he's a gimmick to get kids to bring their parents to McDonald's to eat. Mm-hmm. In the ways of Happy Meals, in the ways of bargains with 2 for $5 or 2 for whatever deals on their food. And those are all gimmicks. And you have to have a gimmick to bring in your customers or your readers or your buyers or whichever you're targeting with what you're selling. And that's the reason for the Coffee with Jesus. Like I say, it's not actually about Jesus, but it is about the world that his Father created for us. And that is a gimmick to say that when you see that on the shelf, you see that and you naturally want to pick the book up and thumb through it. I think that's pretty neat, If anything, the cover is really, really an eye catcher, see?
Absolutely.
So, and it's the same way with the other book.
Absolutely. I remember you discussing that in the first go round, Richard, and I think it's such great advice. Guys, we've discussed so much, but we haven't even really gone into the book too much, right? A lot of the experiences that Richard has incorporated within the book haven't even been touched up on. And I love it that way, because now you get to head on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Google Books, and you get to pick up copies for yourself to really go page by page and learn all about the experiences. Richard, once again, man, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Well, it's my pleasure, actually. I always enjoy talking to you, Benji.